Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Jason C. with the Tennessee Student Assistance Corporation, and it is Friday, October 13th, and we are recording our annual FAFSA completion webinar. I have my colleague, Mary Nell, with me as well. She may or may not, I'm going to say contribute. But anyways, here we are, Friday, October 13th. That means we have 13 days have now come and gone since the, I don't know if that's proper grammar. I apologize, guys, if anyone. It's close enough, right? But anyways, 13 days have now passed us since the opening of the 18-19 FAFSA. And as we annually like to do, we do like to give everyone a kind of a FAFSA webinar and some of the things that that you have perhaps experienced in these 13 days. I want to share, I guess, what I've experienced in those 13 days, and my team and our teams all across the state have experienced in these 13 days as well. So to begin, just a quick overview with the 18-19 FAFSA. There we go. The 2018-19 FAFSA, again, became available October 1st. That was a Sunday, October 1. Website still is going to be FAFSA.gov. And I guess maybe the most important thing about the 18-19 FAFSA, as a reminder, with this early FAFSA, this is year 2. Remember, with the early FAFSA, FAFSA has shifted to prior tax year, which means, most importantly, as it relates to the 18-19 FAFSA, it will only ask information regarding parents and students' 2016 tax income information. So just as a reminder, it will only ask for 2016 tax information. You know, being this is year 2, again, of this early FAFSA, I think we're still experiencing, parents who have previously done completed these FAFSAs. They're still in the mindset that you have to do this in January or that you have to update it once your taxes are filed in April. But as a reminder, all that's no more. This FAFSA now you need to submit as soon as possible after October 1, and you're only going to use, in this case, 2016 tax information. In other words, you're not going to update it with 2017 tax information at all. So, the idea is if you're submitting this in October, November, using 2016 tax information, you should then be done until the subsequent October when you then do the next year's FAFSA. Deadlines. So for the 18-19 cycle, as it relates to TSAC, the Tennessee Promise and Tennessee Student Assistance Award, that is our state grant, TSAA, as many of you know, who are probably listening to this, the deadlines for those programs as it relates to the 18-19 FAFSA is January 16th. Again, you've already heard me say parents and students should be getting this FAFSA submitted in October and November, ideally prior to the holidays is what I think we're trying to encourage all families to do each and every year. But specifically for Tennessee Promise and TSAA consideration purposes, the 18-19 FAFSA must be submitted by January 16th. But for parents and students who, for whatever reason, do not submit this FAFSA in this 107-day window, obviously they're still able to submit the FAFSA thereafter. And so as a reminder, as it relates to the Tennessee Hope Scholarship, the 18-19 FAFSA deadline for next fall to receive payment will be or is September 1st. So, as a reminder, if for some reason you have families that miss submitting the FAFSA in the initial 107-day window as it relates to Promise and TSAA consideration, let's still prompt them to get that FAFSA submitted so that they can still be applying for programs like the federal Pell Grant, obviously federal student loans, and the Tennessee Hope Scholarship as well. So just as a reminder about FAFSA deadlines and the importance of submitting it whenever you might be doing it throughout this window. So FAFSA checklist. So for some of you listening to this, school counselors or college access professionals who may be preparing to conduct a FAFSA frenzy workshop on your campus. Here's a checklist of items that I would encourage our parents and students to have with them to complete the 2018-19 FAFSA. Their Social Security numbers. Obviously, many times our parents and students sometimes forget their socials, and so I think it's always important to at least bring those with them, or to double check those numbers and names that appear on Social Security cards prior to coming to a FAFSA workshop, just so that they are entering the correct information as they're submitting this application. Student driver's license. Here in Tennessee, several of our public colleges utilize the driver's license information reported on the FAFSA by the student to verify the student's eligibility for in-state tuition. Hence, if the student has a driver's license or a driver's permit or state-issued ID, any of those three forms of identification, because all three will carry the same number over time. In other words, if a student's been issued a driver's permit, once he or she then is issued the driver's license, the same number is used on both forms of identification, and hence can be reported on the FAFSA that, again, some of our public colleges use to double-check eligibility for in-state tuition. So my point here is, if the student has a driver's license or a driver's permit or a state-issued ID, they should report the number that's on that onto the FAFSA when prompted for the number, just for in-state tuition verification purposes. Again, that's just a recommendation by me. Questions optional on the FAFSA, but it's a recommendation by me. Probably the most important thing on this slide, as you prep for your upcoming FAFSA workshops at your school or your organization, I'm going to encourage students and parents to bring their 2016 tax returns, and notice the bolded and underlined W-2s. All right, we're going to get to this in a bit, but it really is important, just in case, for the parents and students to bring their tax returns. But to me, most importantly, those W-2s, because of something I'm going to get to here in just a bit on the FAFSA as it relates to the IRS data retrieval tool. So, if it was me and I am obviously promoting my FAFSA event, and I'm sending out communication to parents and students what they need to bring, strongly encourage them to bring, for those that filed their taxes, their 2016 tax returns, and again, the W-2s associated with those tax returns, for something that we will cover in just a bit. So before we get into the actual FAFSA, a few slides about the FSA ID. As a reminder, the student and a parent should create a username password. So again, each, the student and a parent, so should each create a username password in order to electronically sign the free application for federal student aid. When you're working with high school seniors, this is pretty easy, right? None of them have probably created a username password for FAFSA before, right? So you just tell the student, go to fsaid.ed.gov and begin that process of creating the username password under the student's name, the student's social, the student's date of birth, so that they can create, again, that username password to be used to log in and also to sign the FAFSA. But as a reminder, a parent needs to have one of these created for he or she as well, all right? And this is something, again, these last 13 days, no matter how many times you or I have presented probably this topic, for some reason, I'm still getting a lot of parents who seem confused by this, that they think only the student has to have a username and password. So again, to be very clear, the parent, specifically a parent, either mom or dad, also needs to create a username and password under either mom's name, social, date of birth, or dad's name, social, and date of birth. Again, if a Social Security specifically as a parent exists, that's somewhat of foreshadowing to us subject that we'll talk about towards the end of this in terms of parents who may not have Social Security numbers. But again, just focusing on those parents that do have socials, a parent also needs to have one of these created as well. I should make note that a parent who has another child in the last now 2 years that's where they've helped that particular student who's in college complete the FAFSA, more than likely that parent already has a username password created. So if that's the case, then that parent is good to go. That parent does not necessarily have to create another, or will not have to create another username password in that example. But again, for a parent that's never done the FAFSA with a child, with a student, if this is their first student that they're helping with a FAFSA, as a reminder, the student will need to create that username password, and a parent as well, just as a reminder. All right. Last thing on this, as they create the username passwords, just make sure, I always encourage the student and parent to write down all that information. In other words, if they used an email, whatever email was used, obviously what username that they created, what password that they created, the mobile number that they used, more about that in just a second, and also their challenge, answers to their challenge questions as well. Marinelle, it looks like you have a question for me.
I do have a question. Yeah. Are you going to go into a little bit later what this might look like for a student that doesn't have a traditional family situation, that's maybe living with an aunt or an uncle, that's not a legal guardian? Yeah, so Marinelle's question, just to make sure that as we're recording this, just make sure it was heard, but specifically for students that may have a non-traditional family situation, she asked, will I be covering that in this webinar? And the answer is yes. Specifically, if a student lives with an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent, etc. I guess to maybe touch on that a little bit right here. Again, per FAFSA, a parent is defined as the biological or adoptive parent. So generally speaking, a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, a cousin, a brother, or sister will never be considered a parent on the FAFSA unless that individual has adopted that student. So the point here, as we're talking about FSA IDs, obviously if I'm a student who lives with my grandparent, my grandparent more than likely will not be creating a username and password. Again, key there is unless that grandparent, aunt, uncle, etc. has adopted the student. More about that in a bit, but Marinelle, keep me honest as well. But you and I did develop a couple of those FAQs that will hit that on the end. But that's a good point, I think, to reemphasize that as well. So we'll go into the next slide. This is just as you go to fsaid.ed.gov, this is that initial screen where the student and or parent, whoever's creating the username password at the time, this is the first screen that they're going to look at. Just as a reminder, the only thing that's required is the username and password to be created. That's all that's required. Now, again, if the student parent do possess emails, yes, I would love for them to go ahead and use the email that they possess. But, I was at a school last night where there were several parents that I worked with who did not have email addresses. And for that particular workshop, question was, Jason, well, should we create an email for them? That's obviously an option and is an idea. But for that workshop, and kind of segue into the next screen, because the new mobile phone verification option, because this particular parent I was working with did have a cell phone, I chose to, again, just create or have mom just create the username and password, and then we went ahead and verified her mobile number in case she ever lost that information. So in other words, the email it has somewhat become less important since the addition of the mobile number verification. And here is the segue into that. So really the biggest change this year to the FSA ID process is that FSA ID is allowing
the student and the parent, as they create the individual FAFSA ID, to register the mobile number, so that if the username and or password are ever forgotten, they can have FAFSA ID to send them like the security codes to them via text on the mobile number that's registered, and follow that process to reset or to retrieve a username and or a password. And so this is just a screenshot that shows, you know, where they're prompted in terms of what I would encourage them to say, yes, I would like to register my mobile number for the account recovery. And then later on in the FAFSA ID process, they will get to a screen where at that point in time, they should check their cell phone, and there should be a text with a 6-digit code that they then would enter into a box that would then register that mobile number. And in case there's ever issues with that username or password in the future, they would then be able to use that mobile number to reset the password and or retrieve username. Yeah. Marielle, just because you're sitting here, I think good. I mean, I think that's really what we've been covering about the new process for FAFSA ID in terms of the mobile number. If I may, I did not necessarily bring this up in the previous slide, but here, before we go on, again, just the importance of the reminder that, again, a student should create one of these username and passwords. And again, if a parent has never done this before, never completed FAFSA for themselves as a student or for another child who's been a student in the last couple of years, that parent also will need to create a username and password for, again, the mom or a dad, right? That being said, as they create these, mobile numbers do need to be unique. Obviously, if mobile numbers are possessed, in other words, you cannot use the same mobile number for the student's FAFSA ID as you would a parent's FAFSA ID, and that still applies to the email addresses as well. Again, I'm going to encourage parents, students that have email addresses, use them, but just as a reminder, the email addresses and mobile numbers that are used throughout an FAFSA ID application need to be unique by individual. So once the FAFSA IDs are created, and again, I'm presenting this webinar just like I present at a financial aid presentation, which is, this is my way of coaching a family to complete the FAFSA. I think the first thing that they should do is have those FAFSA IDs created, or to create the FAFSA ID. So in other words, last night at Lake County High School, first thing we did as parents and students entered the computer lab is we asked, student, do you have an FAFSA ID created? If not, that's where you're starting. Mom or dad who's with the student, do you have an FAFSA ID created, right? If mom or dad said no, then that's where mom or dad would have started as well, at the FAFSAID.ed.gov website. But once, again, both had the FAFSA IDs created, then it was time to, let's go to FAFSA.gov and let's log in. And as always, log in as the student, because as a reminder, it is the student's application. That's what parents and students should always remember. Ultimately, it is the student's application. So first thing, what we see on this slide is a reminder to pay attention to screens. So here are two screens that I have screenshotted, or screenshot, again, forgive me, for those of you who are English teachers or whatever. Hopefully I'm using good grammar throughout this. But as you see here, there is the one on the left, you see it's blue vertically, you see student. So as an individual, I'm going to say it like that, as an individual is completing a FAFSA, that individual needs to pay attention to the left-hand side of each screen. If it's blue and if it says student, then the questions being posed are of the student, okay? Whereas once the FAFSA transition into the parent sections, you notice that the vertical bar on the left changes from blue to purple, and it says parent. So again, here, whoever is completing this FAFSA, once they begin seeing purple parent, that means the questions posed are about the student's parent, okay? So another thing, as parents and students and as counselors, college access professionals, et cetera, as we all help students and families complete the FAFSA, as a reminder, that help and hints box on each screen of the FAFSA, each time you put your mouse and cursor inside of a particular box to answer a particular question, you can look and read and review that help and hints box to the right to see exactly what that particular question is asking. I think where Marinelle, myself, and a lot of our colleagues find this most useful specifically is when you get into those tax income-related questions, asset-related questions, because oftentimes, none of us are CPAs, right? I'm assuming, and so we may not necessarily know specifically, well, what box on the tax return or W-2 should we be looking at to find an answer for a particular question, or for parents and students who are asked to report their asset or investments, sometimes we forget, well, what are specifically considered assets and or investments? And again, it's important. You might not remember that always, so consult with that help and hints box on each screen of the FAFSA if you are unclear about what a question is asking. So the next couple of screens is just all the screenshots of a FAFSA. And just to kind of reiterate this idea of this is the student's FAFSA. So when you go to FAFSA.gov, you'll see that that login page where again the students can either click start a new FAFSA or log in. Folks, it does not matter because whichever green button that they click, they'll then see the screen right next to it, which is the login screen. Now, ideally, the students created the student's FSA ID, the username, password, so of the student, that's what should be entered on that next screen, right? So once that's entered, now this year what we're seeing is a disclaimer message that, obviously the student can read and then obviously, hopefully they're going to accept so that they can proceed to the next screen, which is where they're able to select which FAFSA that they need to complete. Obviously, if you're working with a high school senior or if you're working with any student, college student, returning college student, or student who's looking to attend college for the first time, sometime beginning with the fall 2018 semester, these students need to complete the 2018-19 FAFSA. Now, for perhaps some of our colleagues that are working with potential reconnectors who might be looking to begin college in the spring of 2018, as you will see, the 17-18 FAFSA is still available as well, for them to complete too. Again, a student who's specifically looking to attend college in spring of 18. But I'd say for the majority of you listening to this webinar, you're probably assisting individuals who are looking to attend college in fall of 18. So the 18-19 FAFSA is what should be selected. Once that's selected, then they'll get to the screen where it's asking them to create a save key. As many of you know, the save key, you create that just in case you're unable to finish the FAFSA in a particular setting. And so if not, then the save key will be prompted, whatever you create, that will be asked of you so that you can pick up where you last left off in that last setting of the FAFSA. Again, my tip here, all it has to be is a 4-digit number. I mean, it can be any 4 to 8 character word, phrase, number, etc. But I try to be simplistic, guys. 4-digit number, year of birth, year of graduation, some 4-digit number, type it in, write it down just in case you need it. But again, once created and once re-entered, you click next. Next screen is an introduction page. Obviously, just go ahead and click next. And again, this is where we get into the actual FAFSA, where the three screens you see on the bottom of this slide, these screens are simply asking, again, questions about the student. Notice the left-hand side of each of these screens, you see that blue vertical bar that reads student. So again, these are specific, screens asking questions about that student. So just as a reminder, and especially, parents who might be the ones that are actually filling this out for their son or daughter, as a reminder for those parents. Again, these are all screens thus far that are about your students. So be cognizant of that as you go through these screens. The next set of slides, you continue from, I guess, the top left-hand corner is a screenshot of where students will enter the colleges they want their FAFSA to be sent to. Students may enter up to 10 colleges at a time on the FAFSA. So just FYI about that. Oftentimes, I think we're asked the question, does order matter? At this point in time, folks, the answer is no anymore. But selfishly, just from a TSAC perspective, just as a reminder, whatever Tennessee college is listed first in that grouping, right? And a lot of you have heard me use the following example where I say, so for example, if the student lists, a school like Western Kentucky University or UNC Chapel Hill, University of Georgia, let's say they list those schools 1, 2, and 3, and then they follow those schools up by listing Columbia State and University of Memphis, for example. From a TSAC perspective, when we receive that FAFSA, what we're looking up and down that list for is that first Tennessee college that was listed. And in that example I just gave, it was Columbia State. All right. So just again, as a reminder, from a state perspective, any state aid eligibility, any state aid award letters you receive will reflect in that example Columbia State. All that means is if you ultimately attend, I think University of Memphis as my other Tennessee college as an example there, then ultimately, if you attend University of Memphis, ultimately you're going to have to update your award with TSAC just to move, say, your Hope Scholarship or your TSAA from Columbia State to University of Memphis. That is not a big deal at all. And speaking of that, though, I was asked the question last night of, Jason, if that's the case where, say, you had Columbia State and University of Memphis and all your state aid was at Columbia State, understand that you have to change that in the student portal. The question I was asked was, does the student have to return to FAFSA and actually move University of Memphis in front of Columbia State? The answer is no. That is no longer a requirement, all right? Again, as long as the college was listed on the FAFSA, all right, and specifically on the last FAFSA that was submitted, if there were multiple corrections potentially done, as long as that college was listed, all you would need to do would be to update that college via the TSAC student portal to get your money moved from college X to college Y. All right. Again, a couple other screenshots here. After you enter all your college codes, then you'll have to select your housing plans. That's the top middle screenshot. The final, or I should say the top right-hand screenshot, this is a screenshot of the dependency question page. So this is where the student will be answering the dependency questions, right? And as they answer, assuming, especially if you're working with high school seniors, more than likely they're going to answer no. And as to each question, and as they answer no to these questions, more questions will pop up. All right, until they finally answer, I believe it's 13 in total. Assuming they answer no to all 13 questions, once they click next, on the next screen, which now is the bottom left-hand corner screen, they'll be asked if they're able to provide parental information. Assuming they are, they will click that. They'll click next. And now, notice the change. Bottom right-hand corner screen goes from the student screen now to the parent screen. So this is where the questions now are being asked of the student's parents. So of mom, of dad, or whatever that marital situation might be. in this case. So again, these are questions that are posed to the student's parent. All right. On the next slide, you'll see the rest of the parent slides or screens on this slide, which are all, in this case, related to the parent's income. All right. Some of the slides that I purposefully omitted in this presentation were the slides that take you to IRS Data Retrieval Tool, but we'll get to that in just a second. But that said, notice that after that initial parent slide, this parent should expect to now encounter 4 more slides related to their income. So just FYI. Now, then once most parents get through those slides, what happens is FAFSA goes back to the student and beginning asking questions about the student's income. And every night this week that I've helped with a FAFSA workshop or presented about the FAFSA at a school, I've encountered at least one family per workshop or per presentation that, because they have not paid attention to the left-hand side of each screen, when the parent reached these screens about the student's income, they found themselves re-entering income based upon the parent. So as an example, right, parents make, let's say, $75,000 a year. They entered that on the parent section of the FAFSA, got through all those screens as a parent. Then they get to this screen where specifically it's asking about the student's income. They found themselves entering yet again that, oh, well, I made $75,000. When specifically it's asking the student, what did you make in 2016, right? So just be careful with that. Obviously, if in a couple of the case instances this week, parent actually submitted the FAFSA this way, where basically they double reported the parent's income for not only the parent but also the student, that is correctable. It is correctable. It's fixable. No worries. But again, if the parent simply had paid attention to the screens, they have been all right. Marinelle is handing me another question. Marinelle, we'll get to that in just a bit. This is good. I like this. With Marinelle in here and handing me questions. So once the student answers questions about the student's 2016 income, all right, then finally bottom right-hand corner screenshot, you see the signature page. This is where the student, the parent will sign and then submit the FAFSA, and ideally at that point in time be done. And what follows there would be the confirmation screen, which would communicate the student's expected family contribution, which, as a reminder, is used by the financial aid office to determine whether or not a student qualifies for a Pell Grant and other need-based aid programs which may use the expected family contribution. But I'll say that might be a separate webinar one of these days about EFC and maybe reviewing award letters, stuff like that. So now that we've gone through each individual screen of the FAFSA, I guess maybe the important update this year as it relates to FAFSA, IRS Data Masking. So what's new this year for parents and students who are able to use the IRS Data Retrieval tool? The information, and then obviously what we see is most parents are able to use it because most parents are required to file taxes. And so to focus in on parents for a second, as parents use the data retrieval tool, as they're taken to the IRS.gov website from FAFSA, and as they enter the address as it appears on the 2016 tax return at the IRS.gov website, what they should experience is that the IRS finds the information that needs to be shared with FAFSA. But unlike in previous years where the parent would see all their numbers, meaning their incomes and other income-related data that would be transferred to FAFSA, for to hopefully, and I say to hopefully, but what should be a more secured experience. What IRS and FAFSA what they worked together to do was to increase security for parents and students using the data retrieval tool. And so what they decided to do this year is mask the income information that would be transferred from the IRS site to FAFSA itself. So what you see here is on the other screenshot and I have screenshot specifically a student screenshot where it asks, what income tax return did you file? What was your and in parentheses, and your spouse's adjusted gross income from 2016. What you see underneath that is simply the phrase transferred from the IRS. You do not see what actually transferred. So just FYI, that's part of this IRS data masking this year. So parents and students should understand that the information transferred from the IRS, it will be masked at the IRS site, also on the student's FAFSA, and then later, once the FAFSA processes, on that student aid report, okay? So all the income information will be masked at that point in time. Now, right underneath that, on the screenshot, again, I'm looking at the student screenshot, and again, you can pretend this is a parent screenshot, either one, because it's going to look very similar. One thing, and this goes back to where I said earlier, why it's important for our parents and our students that did file to have their W-2s with them, especially married couples, right? Married couples need their tax return W-2s specifically because the two things that are unable to transfer from the IRS data retrieval tool is how much specifically did parent 1 earn from work versus how much did parent 2 earn from work. And because the IRS is now masking all tax data from the data retrieval tool, or being transferred from the IRS through the data retrieval tool, we no longer as professionals have like what the AGI is to even guess what portion of that AGI was mom's versus dad's, parent 1 versus parent 2, right? So again, the importance of having the W-2s there on site so that you can correctly answer that information, okay? Now, I was working with several directors of financial aid at the workshop I was at last night and throughout this week, and I posed the following question to them. So what happens if you're at a FAFSA workshop and your parents do not have those W-2s? Is it okay to guess at the income earned from work? And the consensus, the absolute consensus from these director of financial aids, all right, they all indicated, Jason, yes, it was okay to encourage, to have the parent to initially, look how I'm saying this, initially, fill in that or guess at that, especially with those families who, if we don't get that FAFSA submitted during that setting that we're working with that family, that FAFSA might not get submitted. So that's the rationale, folks. Again, FAFSA is correctable, and that's what the directors of financial aid who I've worked with this week all said. That, as a reminder, the FAFSA is correctable, all right? So especially for those families who we need to have that FAFSA submitted, in that one setting we're working with them, it is okay to initially guess, but on down the line, that may be information that needs to be corrected, right? And especially for those families who are selective verification, that will be information that will be corrected during the FAFSA verification process. So just a reminder there of why having the W-2s are reported to ideally get that FAFSA submitted right the first time.
I have a question.
Yes.
So I have heard from different people that if you use the IRS data retrieval tool, that it decreases your chances of being selected for verification. Is that a rumor you've heard, true or false?
So, Marinelle, as someone like yourself who sometimes sits in on webinars presented by Federal Student Aid, I have actually never heard a FSA representative address that topic at all. verification is still a random selection process. And so that being said, I personally have not heard that using the data retrieval either increases or decreases verification selection. But what I can speak to is the fact that if that student's FAFSA is ultimately selected for verification, if the student used data retrieval tool initially, that's kind of part one of the verification process, right? So in other words, it behooves parents and students to use the IRS data retrieval tool. Folks, I don't think as long as the student parent's able to, I don't think there's a reason why they shouldn't at least attempt to use it, because again, if they're selected for verification, that's kind of step one, in terms that's already completed and satisfied for that verification process. All right. Last important thing, or this is new, and this is new to everyone. That as Marynell and all of our colleagues here at THAC and TSAC, as we did those core trainings with our colleagues over at the Department of Education, Lee Bagwell and others, we weren't presenting on this particular slide then because we were unaware of this, but we're now aware of it, which is what you need to know. Parents and or students who do use the data retrieval tool, they should expect a letter from the IRS that reads, as you can see from this screenshot, notification of access to the Department of Education's IRS data retrieval tool. So again, this is a new security measure, which again, any parent, student who uses data retrieval tool or whose information is used to access the information from the data retrieval tool, that parent, that student will receive a letter from the IRS basically saying, hey, per our records, you use the IRS data retrieval tool. If this is true, you're good. If you did it, you're good. However, if you did not use the IRS data retrieval tool, then you need to call the number that you will see on the letter. So guys, the point here is, as we work with students, okay, there really needs to be communication between that student and the parent from this perspective, right? That parent needs to know, especially if he or she's not there present when you might be helping the student with the FAFSA, that parent needs to know, right? If that parent has given that student, his or her information, in order to complete the parent section of the FAFSA, that ideally, if the IRS data retrieval tool is used, then that parent should expect to receive a letter from the IRS just saying, hey, that retrieval tool is used. And again, if that was good, that was good. But of course, the fear here is if that communication is not made, a parent may receive this letter and go, whoa, I didn't use the data retrieval tool. And then they may call the IRS and, guys, I don't know what may or may not happen after that point. But again, back to really the point of letting everyone know this is basically, students and parents, they need to know that this what's happening. In other words, students shouldn't, I'm not going to say this, but students shouldn't, maybe steal their parents' information, because unfortunately, if they're quote unquote stealing their parents' information simply to complete the FAFSA, their parents are going to know that, because if they use the data retrieval tool, their parents are going to receive this IRS notification of access letter. So FAFSA FAQs. So at this point in time, we've gone about 45 minutes. Hopefully I can run through these FAFSA FAQs right quick. These are things that you've heard me address kind of time after time after time. First question that still is asked, who is eligible to file the FAFSA and receive federal student aid? As a reminder, the student, all right, again, specifically the student, must possess a valid social and be either a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen as outlined in this particular screenshot. This is also outlined within our Tennessee FAFSA Frenzy Toolkit guide. Marinelle, help me on that.
Toolkit.
Yeah, toolkit.
Resource guide.
Yeah, a toolkit or resource guide. And so this resource guide toolkit may be found at our tnfafsafrenzy.gov website. And specifically on page 9, you'll see an infographic of basically what was spelled out on the previous slide, which again, for a student to be eligible for federal or state aid, he or she must possess a valid social and be a citizen or an eligible non-citizen as defined by this infographic or on the previous screen. And again, to emphasize, that is the student. Next question. Do I have to provide parents' information on the FAFSA? Well, this is all related to those dependency questions. And again, going back to that FAFSA Frenzy toolkit or guide, if you look at page 19 within that publication, or electronically via the PDF at our tnfafsafrenzy.gov website, you'll see the dependency infographic. So these are the dependency questions. Now, most of our students who we're working with in high school, they're going to answer no to all those questions. They're going to be considered dependent, which at that point in time, in theory, they then need to provide parents information to complete the FAFSA. Now, obviously, on the other hand, if they are able to answer yes to one of those dependency questions. For example, student, are you or were you in a legal guardianship as determined by a court in your state prior to reaching the age of 18? If obviously a grandparent, an aunt or an uncle, a brother or sister has been granted guardianship of said student, then that student would answer yes to that particular dependency question. That would make the student independent on the FAFSA, which means only the student's information would be needed to complete the FAFSA. No one else is in that example. Now, as always, there are situations where the student answers no to all of them, but they have a unique situation where perhaps they're unable to use or to provide parents' information. You know, in those instances, what we encourage is the student to submit the FAFSA, and the FAFSA will prompt them to do this. If they are unable to provide parental information, they can submit their FAFSA as a special circumstance, and then you know, after the new year, after January 1, at some point that student will need to contact, you know, that college's financial aid office to discuss their particular circumstances to really ascertain what now they need or should do for FAFSA purposes. Again, let's be clear, go ahead and submit that FAFSA here this fall as a special circumstance, then follow up with the financial aid office after January 1 as colleges begin shifting to packaging awards for the 18-19 academic year, and discuss with the financial aid office the situation, and then go from there, work with the financial aid office to see what you might need to do from there. Who is my parent when I fill out my FAFSA? You know, Marinelle asked that question earlier while we were talking about the FSA IDs. This is, again, an infographic from that FAFSA Frenzy Toolkit guide on page 18. Who is my parent when I fill out the FAFSA? You heard me talk earlier. Parents defined as the biological or adoptive parents. So typically that eliminates grandparents, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, etc. As you follow this flow chart, which I think is pretty self-explanatory, you know, just as a reminder, obviously if the parents are divorced, specifically the biological parents are divorced, and if as you go through this flow chart, what you will see, you know, FAFSA will then ask, well, student, which parent did you live with the most? So just as an example, if you live with your biological mom the most, and if biological mom has now remarried, FAFSA does and will require mom plus stepdad's information. Again, you can consult page 18 of that FAFSA Frenzy Toolkit to see and review this infographic. And this is just a reminder, the following people are not your parents on the FAFSA unless they legally have adopted you. And so, again, that goes through the grandparents, guardians, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, etc. Again, none of these individuals will ever be considered a parent on the FAFSA unless they have legally adopted you, the student. What if my parents do not have a Social Security number? So, parents who do not possess socials, right? So first, those parents will be unable to create an FAFSA ID. However, their information still needed on the FAFSA. So when the FAFSA, the actual FAFSA application, asks for the parents' socials, the parents should enter all zeros for the parent social. And then specifically, in order to sign that student's FAFSA at the end, in lieu of that FAFSA ID for the parent, because again, the parent has to have a social in order to create an FAFSA ID, the parent would select the print signature page option, print that page, sign it, and then mail that signed page in to the address that's indicated on that specific page to FAFSA in order to have that FAFSA process. And this is a screenshot of the actual bottom half of the signature page where the parent would print or has the selection to print a signature page so that they can do that. Just as a reminder, once the signature page is printed, that blue button at the bottom right-hand corner does need to be clicked. So in other words, if I'm working with a family, if I've got that signature page, if it's printed and I have it in my hand, just as a reminder, that parent does need to click Submit My FAFSA button to at least submit that FAFSA. But again, that page that you have in your hand, have mom or dad to sign it and then mail it into the address that's indicated on that actual sheet. Final FAQ, what if my student's parents refuse to provide information on the FAFSA? So, here's the answer. Obviously, you can read it, but bottom line is this. If that student is considered dependent, okay, they are unable to answer yes to any of those dependency questions, okay, and if they live with mom or dad, but mom and dad simply refuses to help them with the FAFSA, that student needs to understand that this particular scenario does not warrant a special circumstance by the financial aid office. Again, specifically, just a parent's refusal to help that student with the FAFSA. And so, folks, unfortunately, what that means is that those parents continuously refuse to help that student, that dependent student per FAFSA with that FAFSA. The only financial aid that student will qualify for, student loan. All right, that's it. So in that case, no Pell Grant eligibility, no Tennessee Hope Scholarship eligibility, no Tennessee Promise eligibility. In that example where a parent just refuses to provide that information, for whatever reason, to that dependent student, just understand that does not warrant a special circumstance, and that student will only qualify for a student loan unless that parent acquiesces and eventually does, quote-unquote, release the parent's information to help the student with the FAFSA in that particular scenario. So as we wrap up here, this is perfect. Marinelle hit it. We said earlier, probably going to be about an hour, and she knows me pretty well. She knows these webinars last about an hour. Here's my team, specifically the TSAC Outreach Specialists. Those of you, this is a map of our territories. And so if you are a school, a college, a organization, a nonprofit, et cetera, in a particular county who would like, to reach out to a TSAC Outreach Specialist to either come out and to present to a group that you work with, or to maybe conduct a FAFSA workshop. Not maybe. We obviously encourage you, if you want to conduct a FAFSA workshop with your group or whatever, you can by all means reach out to your county's TSAC Outreach Specialist. Just as a reminder, currently the West Tennessee, that's Region 2, is vacant. So in the interim, and for any of the outreach specialists, as a reminder, I am their director, so you can always reach out directly to me, not just if you're in Davidson County, but for if you for some reason you've reached out to an outreach specialist and have not heard back, by all means, feel free to reach out to me. But specifically those of you in Region 2, as we look to hire the new outreach specialist for Region 2, please reach out to me with any questions that you might have. And final thing, Tennessee FAFSA Frenzy, obviously it's ongoing. As the 1819 FAFSA opened October 1, basically any event that you have or that we assist with at THEC and TSAC between October 1st and honestly through the spring semester, that can be considered a Tennessee FAFSA Frenzy event. We have a myriad of resources again at your disposal at tnfafsafrenzy.gov. As a reminder, specifically October 26th, that's Thursday, October 26th, that will be Tennessee FAFSA Frenzy Day, and that's going to be proclaimed as Tennessee FAFSA Frenzy Day. There's a lot of groups and schools that are specifically having a FAFSA Frenzy event specifically on that date. But here's always my reminder, folks, is again, obviously if you're looking for assistance for your event, please, reach out to your TSAC outreach specialist anytime between now, specifically the January 16th deadline window for Tennessee Promise and TSA purposes, but even thereafter, if we need to try to help your students get that FAFSA done so that they can apply for the Hope Scholarship, the Pell Grant, and any other program utilizing FAFSA, any of those events can be considered Tennessee FAFSA Frenzy. Mary Nell's come over and she's actually showing us what the Tennessee FAFSAFrenzy.gov website looks like. Mary Nell, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing that I'll point out on the website, on the home page, is we've got some great data visualizations. These currently have last year's FAFSA information on them, but they will be updated soon with this year's filing percentages. The first thing you're going to see is kind of a heat map. And you can normally hover, there we go. You can hover over the counties to see historical FSA and Tennessee Promise filing rates. There are also tabs that will show you by high school both the Tennessee Promise and the FSA filing rate. If you look here, one new feature this year is that you can narrow that down by county. I know that last year we had a list where you scrolled and scrolled and scrolled and scrolled, and if you were a W school, you just never got there. So this feature makes it a little bit easier as well. The last thing that I will show you is that if you go up to the top of the page and you click on Resources and Links, this will take you to the new FAFSA Frenzy Toolkit, as well as a lot of other helpful downloadable resources and webinars that you can consult to help you with your FAFSA filing initiative. That is all from me. Jason, you have anything else to add?
And that's all for me as well. I guess we should wish everyone, being this is Friday, a great, wonderful weekend and a great Tennessee FAFSA Frenzy season.
Yes, thank you so much, everybody.